To your point, yes, we just
I can't believe what Peter Sweeney's done. That plan is absolutely perfect.
We are
Really,
live.
really good.
We are live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Township of North Belfry Special Council meeting for August the 8th. Councillor Roman sends us regrets. Members of the public have been provided with the following methods to watch and participate in this open meeting electronically. Attend the Township office located at 2958 Greenville Road. Watch the live stream by accessing the meeting on the Township's YouTube page. Attend electronically to observe the meeting or to speak to an item on the agenda. And finally, submit written comments. Submit written comments to the clerk's division that have been provided to the mayor and council prior to the meeting and will form part of the public record. I'd now like to call this meeting to order. Can I have a motion, please, for approval of the agenda?
Moved by myself, second by Councillor Oscar, that council adopt the August 9th, 2022 council agenda as presented.
All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I would now like to do the Indigenous acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Mutual people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and their contributions to our community. We offer this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people of Canada. I'd now like us to pause as we reflect on what has happened as we move forward with our Indigenous partners for a better future for Canada. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest to general Jabira? Seeing none. Items for consideration. I'd like to introduce Andrew McNeely, the Chief Administrative Officer, who will provide council with an overview. CEO McNeely.
thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to acknowledge the senior management team and the background work, time, and effort that's been undertaken in preparation to this. As you can see, when you look at the attachment in the first report, the Fed report 2025 and 2022, you can see there's a number of key milestones where there's been work undertaken by the leadership team in the development of the documents that council will be discussing today, and work that will be unfolding over the next few months. Ms. Brox has a presentation that she's going to be making to council, including some PowerPoint slides. The PowerPoint presentation itself will overlap between the operating budget parameters as we look at preparation of the draft 2023 operating budget, and then there will be aspects that we touched upon as it relates to the 10-year capital forecast for the 2023-2032 time period. While the presentation itself is a sort of a blended overview between the two staff reports, the actual there are two actual reports that form part of tonight's agenda, and there will be separate resolutions for council to consider for each of those two reports that form part of today's agenda. So if council will allow, Ms. Brox will move forward with her PowerPoint presentation, and during the course of presentation, if there's a question members of council have related to the content of the PowerPoint presentation, we're happy to provide a response to the question. And certainly, as we move into the latter part of the agenda and deal with the reports, once again, if there's content information in the report or the attachments, staff would be pleased to provide those follow-up answers to these questions. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Ms. Brox.
Yes, I'm just sharing my screen.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention this evening. Apologies for that. We will be going through, this is the beginning of the budget process. Annually in August, we come to council and make a staff presentation to discuss what's really going to be influenced and really driving next year's budget process. We want to make sure that the parameters that we have determined are appropriate and what council would like to allow for next year's budget. And it really starts the discussion at the senior management level on drafting the next year's budget. And we present that to you in December at the December 12th meeting this year, and then it will be discussed in January at the special budget meeting. All of these points will be finalized by the subsequent council, but this starts the process and allows us to have a beginning portion that is within the allowance of what council is seeking for next year. So tonight's focus, we will talk a little bit about the operating drivers and some of the economic conditions that is facing Canada and Canada. And we will also focus on the draft 10-year capital forecast. There are significant long-term projects in there that we need to make sure are in the right position and timing so that we can plan for next year's capital budget and really make sure we have our timing down for how we are going to achieve these projects. We're also looking to make sure that there are no other projects that council wishes to adopt and that the timing of them really is in how you envision the township moving forward. So if we look at the key drivers that are really influencing the 2023 capital and operating budget, I don't think it comes to anyone's shock that inflation is really high. It is sitting around 8.1% as of year over year, June to the end of June. That's certainly much higher than anyone was hoping for, and it's definitely having an impact on our budget. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to have impacts on our budgets. We are seeing lags in people returning to programming, so it is impacting the timing of revenues. Although a significant number are returning to organized activities, there are still some who are very hesitant to do that, so we are still seeing a lag in those revenues. We have also still increased our costs as we've changed our operations and facilities to account for personal protection equipment, additional cleaning supplies, and items of that nature. And the biggest one is probably supply chain management. As this is a global event, factories in other countries are still impacted. The timing and ability to acquire certain goods is definitely been delayed and extended, and at times it has increased the price as well. Coming out of all of this, we are experiencing higher fuel costs and petroleum products. When we look to our construction projects that use asphalt, the asphalt index has come in significantly higher than we've seen in the past. So again, that will impact us going forward and what capital projects we can participate in. We have begun to roll out the Transform WR program. We have taken our first hybrid vehicle, and there is a cost, unfortunately, to this program, so that is also impacting us. Across the board, we are seeing increases in utilities, your hydro, your heat. Again, should not come as any shock. We're all experiencing that personally as well, but the township unfortunately is cutting into those increases. And the last significant one is really as it relates to wage compensation. The biggest portion of our expenses as a township is related to our employees and their payroll and benefits that are both legislative and provided by the township. So we are seeing an increased cost across the board for that as well. The Bank of Canada issued their 2022 monetary policy report in July. It was not great news. CPI continues, consumer price index continues to rise. They did a survey of consumers and businesses, and unfortunately, the expectations are that it is going to remain high, which can be difficult to, once the expectations are that inflation will stay up, it's harder to get it to move down in terms of monetary policy. However, the bank does see some good news in that by the end of 2024, they do see a return to the more historical 2% inflation. The Canadian economy is considered to be overheated. Labor markets are very tight. That does mean the ability to hire and retain individuals becomes more difficult as well. And we are also now starting to experience a slowdown in the Canadian economy, and they are actually predicting a reduction in the growth rates for the next 2 years. So all of these things are going into driving how we can look at the township's operating budget and what capital projects we can continue in the future. So consistent with prior years, staff are seeking direction from council in terms of the framework for setting up the 2023 operating and capital budget. Again, this is not approving the budget, that will be approved next January. But we are looking for direction so that we can maintain our past practice of increasing the transfers to capital reserves as a minimum of 1% of the 2023 municipal levy. And we're also looking for guidance on the impact on the municipal tax rate after accounting for assessment growth. And staff is suggesting that we attempt to bring in the budget at 3%, or I mean, hopefully less, but 3% municipal tax rate. I don't know if there's any questions on this time of that operating portion of it. There is a resolution later on with regards to.
Councilors, any question? Not at this time. Carry on, please.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Councilor Austin.
So, given the fact that everything is overinflated price-wise right now, is it wise for us to be doing a lot of projects? Is it wise for any township to be doing that? Because if everybody put sorry, you know, if projects all get on hold, then obviously the demand is not there. So I just wondered if maybe we should be shaving off some of the projects that might not be detrimental to do simply because it's too expensive. It's like anything, you know, like if you need a car and cars are ridiculously expensive, then you say, I'm going to do with my old car for this year until maybe next year the prices get a little better. Unfortunately, I understand with the 10-year capital forecast, stuff like that, the more that you bump away, the more you're just piling up these projects. But at some point, I think that we may have to look at the projects and say, you know what, we may have to use that plow for next year. We may have to use this truck for next year. We may have to forego some of the projects. Just a thought. I mean, it doesn't require a discussion. I'm just thinking that, judging by what we discussed last night with the asphalt up at Schmidt Park and that, I got thinking about it last night, and I'm thinking maybe that's a tough one because I know we have funding, but we can't say maybe let's put it off because then we lose the funding. But you know, sometimes when the carrot's dangled in front of you, you're making decisions that are really prudent to budget, you know.
And Councilor Austin, you're correct. And that will come down to the budget. And we will say, okay, I think we're going to be tight in here, so let's put that out here.
Yeah.
We have to be very careful. We don't put too many things out. And I will tell you, the public works yard has been on budget since 1998. And if we had done some of those things in the past, instead of waiting this long, we may not be paying us quite so much. CEO McNeely.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to follow up on the thoughts expressed by Councilor Austin. I think you're quite correct. We are, like any business, we're under pressure in terms of what we have to pay out for base things like our utilities and the like. we do have control over some other things. So as an example, not necessarily looking at additional staff hires next year as part of a cost containment strategy and reprioritize limited dollars to key areas where we have a demand, unless otherwise it creates service disruption. So we talked briefly in the staff report on the 23 operating budget parameter. We talked about we may have to develop a cost containment strategy. We may have to look at delaying or deferring some new programs or adjustments to service levels so that we can manage these transitory pressures, which we hope will sort itself out through 23 and into the early part of 24. What we've asked for in this report is to set the upper limit of what the spend could be. And obviously our objective is to try and go below that. And in that future December release of the draft document, we'll have to identify to council what we've either had to cut out, what we would normally have done on a year-to-year basis, and or reshaped to try and keep within that 3% or less parameter. And then the next term of council will have to decide in the fullness of all of that information whether or not that's an appropriate course of action or whether further adjustments up or down would be warranted. But what staff is seeking today through our discussions is the guardrails, for lack of a better term, in which to frame a draft document that will then be drilled down further through future review, debate, and discussions as we, in the next term of council, focus on the specifics of 23 budget and obviously the 10 capital forecast.
Councillor Austin,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, because, I'm looking at the economy right now and watching the interest rates, watching fuel, watching groceries, watching it. And I dare to say that people are more stressed out now financially than they were going through COVID. Because going through COVID, things remained low. A lot of mortgages froze, like a lot of payments froze and stuff like that. Now it's going full tilt and it's going crazy. So, at some point, somebody has to say, we can't jump on the bandwagon of putting more stress on our residents. Everybody is feeling the pinch. And, we'd like to, or I'd like to see, or the future council, I'd like the future council to understand that we need to be sympathetic to that and hopefully, buck the trend of everything goes up. But we'll see. Those are just comments. Like I said, I didn't mean to bring this up as a discussion but if I'm fortunate to remain in the next council, that's going to be my thought process, that we have to be very, very self-conscious of what we do for the public in this budget particularly.
Carry on, Christine, please.
Thank you, Councillor Osner. Through Madam Mayor, too, we are cognizant of that, which is why we are seeking that 3% increase. And it would be very easy to say inflation's 8%, I want an 8% tax increase, but that's not respectful of our ratepayers, and it doesn't do our due diligence in making sure we have cost containment. So that's what we're seeking to do with the council. If we turn our focus towards the capital 10-year budget, in this forecast, some of the key highlights, we do bring this to council's attention twice a year, once part of the budget process in January, and then again midway through the year as kind of a check and balance and where we're at. We have added 2032 to the forecast to push out one more year. We have been able to acquire significantly more updated costs for the majority of the categories, so that has been reflected. We also took into consideration the leisure services master plan and the recommendation that timings that council approved last night in terms of slotting in some of those projects and where they fit in the next 10 years. If you compare what was presented back in January to now, you will see that our total capital campaign has actually decreased from 121 million to just over 106 million. The two largest expenditures still remain in infrastructure and facilities being slightly higher. And that is where we have a few significant construction programs for facilities, and then the cost of our road networks, bridges, and storm water is takes up the next portion of the spend. This chart just takes the long spreadsheet and provides a more in total focus of where the funds would be spent. 40% of this is on facilities. That would be projects like the Twin Pad, the new public works building, a new town hall, and things of that nature. The purple is the next largest category at 35% for the infrastructure, and that's all of our roads, bridges, sidewalks, stormwater projects. Included in the parks category is improvements to trails as well as items within our parks. The fleet rolling stock has increased slightly as a percentage just because, again, we're focusing on those hybrid or electric vehicles and they do have a slightly higher cost. And then the smallest category really relates to small equipment purchases, studies, or other one-time or infrequent items that we need to do throughout the year. If you look at our sources of funding, this council in particular, and over the last 4 years, has really done a good job at starting to increase the transfers to reserves and really planning and focusing on how we're going to fund some of these major capital projects. I call this slide funding and financing because debt and the reserves is really more about financing as opposed to a source of funding. And the reserves are money that we have raised over the years and put aside for specific projects. It's very difficult to raise taxes in 1 year to replace a bridge. It is much easier to look at your asset life cycle and raise the money over that time period so that when the asset has reached the end of its useful life, you are in a position to refund it. There are a few items that just due to timing, we will be required to use some debt financing. Again, we are looking at taxation dollars over the next 10 years, and a significant portion of those dollars are raised and put into reserves so that we can accumulate funds for the larger projects. We are looking to acquire government grants for some of our marquee projects like the Twin Pad construction. We are also looking at community donations or sponsorships to fund some of those larger items. There is a policy in Ontario that growth should fund growth. So that is where the development charges come in, that those projects are where we have growth in the township and are requiring additional services. We collect the development charges and then spend that towards those. The Parkland Trust also comes in that is that those funds received in lieu of an actual parkland from development. And this township is fortunate to receive the funds from aggregate that we receive primarily because gravel trucks damage our roads faster than normal traffic. So again, we are looking to receive $7.5 million over the next 10 years to be put towards our roads reconstruction. And then as shareholders of Grand Bridge Energy, we have the reserve coming in from the funds from them. And that is what the Energy Plus Reserve Fund is. And again, we're looking to spend $3.9 million of that over the next 10 years towards our capital projects. There are a few projects where we are looking to utilize debt funding to finance projects. The construction of this facility is nearing the end of the debt that will be fully repaid in the fall of 2024. And then coincidentally, the timing for the next projects we're suggesting coming after that. And we are looking at a blend of energy plus reserves money and taxation to repay the debt. If you look at what our taxation dollars are going for, the majority of it we are transferring into reserves, as I previously stated, so that we can fund these larger projects. In 2026 and further, we will also be raising taxation dollars to repay the debt. And then we also have a few projects that are for either infrequent studies or small capital purchases that we are still looking to directly fund out of taxation. But the township has made significant strides to creating reserves for all of our capital needs so that we can reduce the amount of fluctuation that taxation dollars we need from year to year. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is we did review 2022 tax rates for several of our neighboring municipalities in comparison to us. So when we looked at the total tax rate that ratepayers would be paying, within the Waterloo region, we are the second lowest tax rate. And then there's also some information there that is comparison to some of our neighboring or similar size townships. And I think that's an important thing to understand as well, is that when we are talking about increases, when you start with a smaller number, it doesn't go up as much, although I do agree it does go up. So out of today's discussion, there are four key projects, two of which are tied together, that we just want to make sure the timing is what this council is envisioning. It really is the township municipal office, the phase 1 and 2 for the public works depot, and then the twinning of the North Dumfries complex and the adaptive reuse then of the ACC complex. The final slide is really designed to help form the discussion at council. We are seeking directions from you to determine whether or not any of these projects should be dropped in the 10-year capital forecast, whether we should be modifying the scope or changing any of it. If there's any of the timelines that are not what you envision, or if there were things that you would want to see if we could seek partnerships with either governments or sponsors to provide, or if we have not considered a project that you feel is of significance that should be added. So that concludes the end of my presentation. So,
councilors, any questions or comments? Councilor McCreary?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question about the financing of the twin pad. We're counting on getting, I believe, about $2 million of donations from the public. And I'm wondering if the staff are aware of any efforts that have been started to raise that money.
Madam Mayor, through to Councillor McCreary, the CCD, which was formed to actually assist in the fundraising for the original North Dumfries Community Complex in 2009-2011 time period, did raise additional dollars beyond what their ask was to fund the building as we know it today. Between both the original capital that was raised as well as interest that's accrued over time, they have about $600,000 or $700,000 presently within their accounts, and staff are actually framing a report right now, which is presented to council at the September 12th meeting, to talk about a fundraising campaign twin pad project, which right now we are in the design phase, as you know, we retained an architectural service. So the report on the 12th is looking at options for fundraising, because it is an integral component as part of parallel design components, so that if council, future council, awards the project, the funding components to allow the build to occur can be properly utilized.
Any other questions, councilors? Okay, Christina.
So Madam Mayor, there are two reports on the agenda.
Yes,
So it might be appropriate now to turn back to our agenda
yes.
and start with first report, Fin report 2025-22, and staff are available to answer any questions that council might have on the contents of that report.
So firm report 25-2022 is the dates and the 1% minimum for reserves, as well as a 3% tax increase after assessment growth, and the schedule. So any questions on that or comments on regards to that? Councilor McCreary?
I wanted to ask a question about the broadband enhancement strategy for $150,000. I'm not sure when I'm supposed to be asking this.
Go ahead.
It's on the 10-year capital plan.
So Madam Mayor, if I could through to Councilor McCreary, that's in the second report, Fin report 26.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure, in a couple minutes. If there's no questions, can I have the motion, please? And you do not have to read it in its
Sounds good to
entirety.
us.
Oh, did you have a question? Pam? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wondered, is now the time that we say we don't agree with some of these projects, or when do we do that?
Well, right, that's the second report. The first report is the 3% and the 1% and the schedule. First report is 3%, the 1% and the schedule. So then we'll go to discussion in the second report. So any comments or questions in regards to that? Seeing none, Councilor McCreary, please, you don't have to read it in its entirety.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Osner that Fin report number 25-2022 be received, and that council maintain past practice to increase the transfer to capital reserves of a minimum of 1% of the 2023 municipal levy over the total capital reserves allocated from taxation in 2020 to assist in funding the 10-year capital forecast, and that staff be directed to prepare and submit the 2023 draft operating and capital budget within a maximum guideline of 3% increase in municipal tax rate after assessment growth, and that staff publish the adopted 2023 budget meeting schedule in conjunction with the 2023 council meeting schedule on the township's website, social media accounts as part of the ongoing public consultation and community outreach program, and that meetings per the table in report be scheduled to deal with the 2023 budget components.
Thank you. And I think in the one you said 2020 instead of capital reserve allocated from taxation in 2022. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Now, next is the big discussion. Report number 2022. Received for the purpose of information. Councillor McCreary, you were first, and then Councillor Gillespie.
Thank you.
You were talking about. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know about the $150,000 that's been allocated to the broadband enhancement strategy for 2023. We also had $150,000 that was allocated in 2022, I believe. So I'm wondering about a report for how the money in 2022 was spent and what we're going to be doing in 2023.
Zero McNeely.
Madam Mayor, through to Councilor McCreary. You are correct. In the 2022 budget, we identified broadband enhancement phase 1 in the amount of $150,000. Council in previous years had set up a broadband reserve account, and so the funding for the 22 deliverable is coming out of that reserve account. We have not spent any dollars in 2022. So what you see in 23 is just a carry forward to next year. The discussions in 22, we have been successful in motivating, leveraging the private sector. And I hope that in a couple of weeks, we'll be able to make a public announcement as to the extent of the spend to be undertaken by the private sector to bring fiber to the premise in multiple locations across the entire footprint of the office.
Councillor Gillespie.
Thank you. I believe everyone knows that I'm really not, I've never been in favor of doing a new office building, and I think this is the timing we should. We're going to go ahead with Twin Pad plus the other work on Greenfield Road. I think now is the time to really think about whether we need this office building at the moment. As per Councillor Rossler saying that we should be delaying some big capital spends, I think this is one that could be delayed.
CEO McNeely.
Madam Mayor, through to Councillor Gillespie, you're quite correct. I mean, the reality of a big building spend and either usurping of reserves and or debt financing, a combination thereof two, does create upward pressure on the annual operating budget. Staff did not move forward, has not moved forward with the design phase, even though there was money allocated in 22 budget for the town hall project. Staff realizing the major build of a series of campaigns, whether we're looking at town hall, whether we're looking at the refurbishment and expansion to the Works Depot or the Twin Pad project individually or as an aggregate sum, it's a big spend. Staff has started to look at alternatives to standalone town hall project and what alternatives might be available to Township Council as alternatives that would lower the spend and yet achieve the need to provide the appropriate space, especially given that there are future hires to deal with the growing population. And it's trying to create that balance between having the appropriate space, but looking at alternatives that would lower our obligations. That may be in the form of potentially lease rather than through a third party, rather than our own standalone build. It could be rental, short term, to buy us a few more years to get over the hump. It could be a smaller build and adaptive reuse of other space in other corporate buildings. Once again, to bridge us through this time period. Unfortunately, the other two projects have relatively short time periods, and all of three of these projects I just touched upon are in the first half of the next decade, and that places a huge amount of pressure. So we talked earlier about cost containment, talked about revisiting how we spend, being judicious in terms of how dollars are utilized. Those are all coming forward for further review and will be critical items for the next term of council to actually establish a movement. What we have shown in the forecast is just literally the year-over-year carry forward. No decisions at this point in time.
All right, Councillor Gillespie. Is there any other questions or comments?
Okay.
Pardon me, you can't remember? Oh, you've got your hand up. I apologize. Councillor Rossler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't disagree with Councillor Gillespie at all on that viewpoint of the new town hall. Maybe we come down to a point where we readjust when we look at it. It may be we do the Twin Pad first, and then when we don't need the ACC anymore, when we talk about repurposing, that might be like, that might leave us with some more options. But yeah, I kind of agree that we need to really be looking at it. I'm not saying we do need, I believe we do need to get out of this building. But I think it'd be more prudent to do it or more appropriate to do it when things calm down a little bit and things get a little bit more even keeled when it comes to construction costs, etc. Catch-22 is the longer you wait, the more expensive it's gonna be. Like we talked about, if we would have built the twin pad at the beginning, it would have been what, a third of the price it's gonna be now? A quarter? Approximately a third. So I always say, there's no cheaper time to build than now. But unfortunately,
There's only so much.
you know, we needed to consider other factors besides the fact that now's the time to build. So,
Councillor McQueen, I'm sorry, you're not Councillor Olsen?
yeah, I'm done.
Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mayor Foxton. This question is about the 10-year capital plan. Like on page 10, we're showing, public structure or public works infrastructure is being financed by development charges. And the bottom of the page, we have the development charges reserve account going to a negative balance. By 2025, it's 4 million negative, and it stays 4 or 5 million negative for the balance of the 10 years. And I'm just wondering, how does that tie into the treasurer's report, PowerPoint report, where we see all this money being spent on development charges? Do we not really have the development charges coming in? Why are we going negative?
Through Madam Mayor to Councilor Gillespie, excuse me, Councilor Gray, part of it is a timing factor. A lot of the construction costs that are growth related are in the first part of our 10-year decade, and some of the development isn't expected to come in until later on in the period. The report does talk about different strategies for that, including, seeking upfront negotiations with developers to front the money ahead of time, since it is to their benefits that we are improving the roads where the new subdivisions are going in. The other aspect is looking at self-financing within the development account itself, so that the account overall is still positive, and we would just be borrowing from some of the other projects until such time the funds came in.
CEO McNeely.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to add to what Treasurer Brox has indicated, you turn to page 14. You will see we've done, to the best of our ability, a reserve continuity over the 10-year time period of various accounts. If you go to the lower half of those tables on page 14, you'll see reference to development charges. So this is the global development charge account. So for every building permit, whether it be for residential or non-residential, we collect an aggregate grouping of fees attributed to, we'll call it roads, parks, studies, and fire as our primary grouping. That makes the aggregate value of what's drawn for each building permit application. What you saw on the Public Works infrastructure page as a negative was exclusive to the roads portion of the development charge account. But as you can see on page 14, except for the 2 periods of time in 25 and 26, the overall development charge account, recognizing all the transfers in and the transfers out for the various categories, remains in a positive cash flow position. We are, under the legislation, allowed to use the global account to pay cross purposes, as long as the treasurer on an annual basis records those transactions. So that's aspect one. So a number of the DC projects, while they may not be available in a given year, the account is generating a positive cash flow position. The other aspect, and the treasurer touched upon this a moment ago, and it's contained in the report itself. We have the ability under the legislation to identify those projects where we want to enter what's called the development charge credit agreement. So if there's a benefiting owner or owners for a specific project, let's say a road project as an example, We have the ability to negotiate with them a front-end financing agreement. So we effectively use them as a bank. Project is built, they fund it, and over years, there's a repayment back to them. And that can be done in several different ways. There could be a partial payment up front, and they finance the difference. Or they finance the project, and either through when they apply for building permits, they don't pay for, again, a road project, the road portion of the development charge that's due, and or the entire development charge payment, which would be the blend of all those different accounts until they're zeroed out. We need, as part of this forecast, to discuss with council what strategy do you want to utilize on specific projects where we have the ability under development charge permission to pursue that. Our biggest pressure point is in the roads portfolio because we have two overlapping objectives that are occurring almost simultaneously. We have a series of roads in Southern Air that will be transferred from a gravel surface to an asphalt hardtop surface and improvements associated with those roads. And largely that's the Brant-Waterloo Road across the southern part of Air, and or it's the Reedsville piece that's gravel going between Brant-Waterloo and Brigham. Those roads will generate additional traffic caused by the development, hence why they're development eligible. They generally start next year through the balance of the decade. The other offset is the expansion and rehabilitation to the Public Works Depot. It comes out of the same development charges account, but they're layered on top of each other. And so it's a double whammy. And so we have some flexibility here, but you can see the reserve continuity. But we have 2 years worth of stress. And the question becomes, we move a part of the capital forecast. I'll use the sand salt dome as an example. We just put a new roof on that facility a year ago, 18 months ago. Does that extend the life of that complex another 15 years? Well, if it does, then we've got it shown right now for replacement in the forecast, I believe in the 27, 28 time horizon. Well, maybe now it pushes out post 2032. All of a sudden, we just saved ourselves approximately, in today dollars, about $300,000. That helps save some of those DC monies and for the road project or other elements of the PW. We have a facilities life cycle replacement study scheduled for 23. And that will help us better understand whether or not the existing structure, because of the refurb work we did last year, can be pushed out a bit further than we've identified in the forecast right now. So those are the kinds of things that we need to test and truth out a little bit more as we finalize draft 2023 budget. The positive thing is, if you take a look at our reserve continuity, for the most part, we're able to fund the 10-year capital forecast. And with some massaging or tweaking, largely, a number of these projects are profitable.
Councilor Cruz.
Thanks for that. I've got another question related to development charges. When we did the development charges study, we identified the indoor pool as being a growth project, and we were collecting development charges in order to build it. And now that we have decided that we're not going to be doing that, at least not within the next 10 years, what's happening with those development charges?
So, Madam Mayor, through to Councilor McCreary, the Leisure Services Master Plan did not say do not build a pool. It just says it wasn't warranted until a certain milestone. We're still within the permissive window under the legislation to identify that as a deliverable, and as such, it still forms part of our background report and obviously the dollars that we're collecting.
Thank you.
Council, is there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, can I have a motion, please, Councilor Austin?
Moved by myself, second by Councilor Gillespie, that FIN report number 26, 2022 be received for the purposes of information And that all comments received through the discussion at the August 9th special council meeting be returned to staff for further consideration as part of the continuing development of the 2023 budget and associated 10-year capital forecast.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Can I have the confirmatory bylaw, please? Dr. McCray.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Ossner. The bylaw number 3343-22 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council on August 9th, 2022. Be read a first, second, third time and be finally passed, signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk.
All those in favor? That's carried, thank you. And the adjournment, please, Councillor Gillespie.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McCurry, that whereas business before this council meeting is completed at 6:51 p.m. and be it resolved that this meeting adjourns and meets again on Monday, September the 12th at 6 p.m. Committee of the Whole.
All those in favor?